Hello, everyone. Welcome to the guided newspaper reading session. Tonight, we will be looking at a very interesting article. I hope you've joined us. Let me just check on who has joined us. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the guided newspaper reading session. Just waiting for everybody to join. Hello, everyone. Yes, that's great. Let's begin with the guided newspaper reading session. Great. Let's begin with the guided newspaper reading session for 25th of September. These guided newspaper reading classes are going to benefit you in many, many ways. First of all, your vocabulary is going to improve. Second of all, you can use that vocabulary in your IELTS test. Your reading, your speaking, your writing, your listening, all of those require some understanding of the English vocabulary. Here, through these guided reading sessions, you will understand all those vocabulary words. We will learn the meanings of those words. I would also ask you to write down those words and their meanings inside your notebooks so that you can go through them or whenever you want to and learn those new words, use them in your daily vocabulary. Now, because these are very brief classes, 25 minutes, I'm just going to ask you to listen very, very carefully at what I'm about to read for you. This is Titanic Food for All Classes. So this is an article based on the ship Titanic. I hope everyone is aware of the ship Titanic. It was the famous Titanic that sank in 1912. So if you're interested in what the people on the ship ate, this article is definitely for you. So this is by Paul Loudon Brown, FRSA. So everybody knows the movie Titanic, I think, and this is the same ship on which the movie was made. The ship sank in 1912, April 14th, on its maiden voyage. Maiden means first. So on its very first voyage, the ship sank. Titanic was the epoch of our era. So here's a new word for you. I'll just write down these words in the corner for you to take a look at. So epoch means apex, something that is at the very top. So Titanic was the epoch of her era. She was at the topmost position as a ship, a veritable city afloat, and for many a wonderland to explore and enjoy on their first journey across the Atlantic Ocean. It was a city. So the Titanic was super big, it was really huge, and it had more than 900 staff members working on it, more than 2,200 passengers. It had over 1,000 kilograms of potatoes, 2,000 pounds of onions, 1,000 wine bottles, and I believe it also had separate rooms inside the ship for ice cream, for vegetables, for meat. So it was a very big ship, the biggest of its time. And that's why it's called a city, because you can literally afford to feed as many people as you want, and you can literally house as many people as you want on the ship. So it was like a wonderland for people to enjoy as they were journeying across the Atlantic Ocean. Dining at sea has traditionally been the highlight of any passenger's day, and for all classes of passenger, Titanic offered something new and different. Printed menu cards overflowed with the latest French cuisine for the first class passengers. So cuisine means the type of food which is popular in one area. So when we say Indian cuisine, we mean all the dishes that belong to the Indian subcontinent or to the Indian nation. So that's the word cuisine for you. Those in the second class had selections that rivaled most regional hotels. And in third class, plain simple food and lots of it were the order of the day. So if you were a first class passenger, you got to eat the best of the best food. The second class, you had selections that would be kind of like the regional hotels in your area. So if there's any hotels in your area, that's the kind of food you get in second class. And for third class, it was the lowest class on the ship, so it was not very good. What is perhaps hard to appreciate today is the high standards of service experienced by all passengers in 1912. For the first class passengers, dining in the Titanic's restaurant and paying extra for this exclusive dining experience and service and cuisine was on par with the finest European hotels like the Ritz or Hotel Cecil in London. So it was very much like dining at the finest, at the best hotels in Europe. That's what dining in first class Titanic was like. Now imagine going back to 1912 and you're told you can have the best food that's available, the finest food on a ship. That was a very unknown concept to people at the time, and they could not believe it. That's why Titanic was such a big deal back in the time of 1912. Unlike many hotels that sprang up in Britain and across continental Europe during the great expansion of the railways in 1890s and early 1900s, meals for each class of passenger had always been included in their contract ticket. So it means that whatever ticket they got, meals were included in it, except for the first class who had to pay extra for the dining experience at the Titanic's restaurant. Dining, particularly in hotels, was frowned upon by the upper classes in 1890s. Many old established families simply did not dine out in public, so it was not a very good thing for rich people to go out to dine at hotels. A new king and the new Edwardian era changed attitudes. So Edwardian era just means the era of in which King Edward the Fifth, or King Edward the Fourth, was ruling. I hope everyone's getting that. Amongst the youngest members of the gentry, modern industrial wealth of America and many millionaires this created also helped change attitudes towards dining in public. So, a lot of people in Europe had this old money, they had old wealth that was from generations of being part of the royal family. But once they migrated to America, even poor people had a chance to become very, very rich because of the booming economy of America. So these were the nouveau riche, as called in France, the newly rich people who don't have the same gentlemanly approach of the old money classes, but for the newest rich people, they dine out in public, and that's not seen as very good by the old money rich classes. The ocean liners played their part too in the effective democratization of dining. Democratization. You know, India is a democracy. So, here, what can democratization mean? I will take answers from you. What can democratization mean? It means just making it available to everyone. Everyone has a right to do something. India's democracy, everyone has a right to vote. The class system became more defiant and on a person's financial status rather than their social position, following the structure set in place by the railway companies with their three-class system before this in the 1880s and 90s. There were two classes. Cabin was the first class and steward, which is the third class. The differences between the two were huge. So before the Titanic, there were only two classes. Either the very, very rich can afford the first class, or the very, very poor end up affording the third class. So the cabins were luxurious, even by today's standards. The finest food served at tables by uniformed stewards and crested china. China just refers to ceramic utensils. So it's like your average teacup, that's China. Silver plate and glassware. So all of these luxurious dining sets were what they used for the cabins. By comparison, in steerage, basic meals mostly consisting of boiled meats and vegetables cooked in a single pantry, with passengers serving themselves cafeteria style and eating their meals next to where they slept. Until the 1890s, they had to provide their own eating utensils. So as you got the best of the best food in the first class or in the cabin class, in the third class, you had to sit down with everyone to eat right where your bed was. And you also had to bring your own utensils to eat. So imagine how weird it would be for you to bring your own, um, let's say, your knives or your fork to the restaurant. So they didn't even provide cutlery to you. You had to bring your own eating utensils. And the food was very simple, boiled meats and vegetables. Above, steerage accommodation in White Star liners in the 1880s was fairly basic compared with the accommodation provided for third class passengers in the Titanic. So this is how you would have had a third class um, bunk bed or a third class sleeping area in normal ships. Whereas in the Titanic, you had your own cabin, basically. Single men and women were segregated, forward and aft, the midships of the vessels reserved for families. All steerage passengers took their meals below deck and next to their bunks. The bunks and tables were designed in such a way as to be portable. At the end of the voyage to New York, the accommodation was turned over for the carriage of freight or livestock. In this way, the White Star was able to offset the costs of largely one-way immigrant traffic and increase its profits per voyage. So voyage is the journey you undertake to go from one place to another. That's voyage. Above, the food was cooked and served to steerage passengers from a small pantry. So this is where they cooked the food for the third class citizens before the Titanic. The emergence of a new middle class of white collar workers, teachers, factory managers, lawyers meant cabin was simply too expensive and too exclusive. But travel in steerage was similarly out of the question. So there emerged a middle class where they weren't either very rich nor very poor. So cabin was too expensive, steerage was too cheap. The solution was initially to create a small second cabin as discussed, styled in a section of a vessel existing passenger accommodation. The first White Star liner to try this accommodation for just 50 intermediate passengers was the Adriatic in 1883. So that was the first time somebody ever used um, accommodation for the middle class in 1883 by the Adriatic. As the middle class was rapidly expanding, so was the need or purpose to build an accommodation to satisfy this demand. By the early 1900s, the three-class system on the North Atlantic was firmly established with the big four operators. So there were the big four companies which were looking at three-class system, which was by these companies, which is the Hamburg America, North German Lloyd, Conrad and White Star, all operating large modern fleets of vessels able to cope with this new class of passenger. What was the new class of passenger? The middle class. By the late 1900s, in comparison, the provision of the first class dining for many wealthy passengers was just not good enough. New money had to an extent created a democracy where if you could afford to travel in first despite your humble origins, you could dine next to a duke. For the social elite of the time, this presented a terrible social dilemma. The solution, in part, was to further divide first class by offering in the Olympic class an extra charge restaurant and other special dining areas. So they weren't very happy about the fact that you could dine next to a very high member of the royal family if you just had enough money for it. So they wanted to create even more exclusive places to dine at. Initially, this was conceived by J. Bruce Ismay and the senior management of the company as a small experiment in the first of the new Olympic class liners, based in part on the lead made by Hamburg America line in experience would have been incorporated in the planning of their first class accommodation. The transfer of the company's express steamers to the Southampton, New York service, a direct challenge to the German, French, and Dutch lines. So this is all about the ships. Let's go and read about something more interesting, like the restaurant and what food they were served. So the food in the restaurants mm, uh, the restaurant on the Titanic was a very special place. The restaurant had its own kitchen and preparation areas. used a different pattern of china and silver plate, and the bill of fare each day printed on a special design of menu card. So the bill of fare, so how much you would pay for a meal, was printed every day in a special design. Operated as a private concession and managed by A.P. Luigi Gatti, an Italian restaurateur who owned several establishments in London. He also operated the restaurant in Olympic. So there were three ships by the same company. These were called sister ships: the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannica. The Britannica came after the Titanic. It also stunk, by the way. So the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannica, the Olympic is the only one that was unharmed. So isn't it kind of amazing that two ships by the same company sank one after the other? Over 60 staff, mostly French and Italians, were employed and paid directly by Gazzi, but overall control of both these restaurants remained with the White Star. For Titanic's first voyage, Gazzi brought over Pierre Rousseau, his head chef in Olympic. Rousseau, aged 49, was born in France but had worked for many years in Britain. He was highly experienced, had become a chef at the prestigious North British Station Hotel in Edinburgh, opened in 1902, as well as in one of Gatti's London establishments. So this is all about the people who were actually operating as chefs. So I'm not going to read this one. I'm just going to come to the main dish or the main part of the essay. Here you can see the plates. These are hot water plates. These are food warmer plates. It's in silver. It was designed by Elkington but made under license by Goldsmiths and Silversmiths.co Limited, and bearing their trademark Regent plate. So how were first class passengers actually served food? You know, sometimes they would really not like to go up to the restaurant and eat. So if you just wanted to have breakfast in bed or in your own private, like a house, because the Titanic was big enough to give private parlor rooms to, to the very, very rich. So they use these plates. In this hole, you insert warm water and then you place food over here so the food stays warm. Passenger servants were provided with their own maids and valets dining saloon located in the Titanic's sea deck, the entrance to which was to the side of the bottom of the grand staircase. So you must have seen the grand staircase on the Titanic. I'll show you. This was supposedly the grand staircase of the Titanic. You must have seen it in the movie itself, I think. The grand staircase. Okay, passengers and servants were provided with their own maids. Okay. In this strange in-between world, they had neither the rights nor the privileges of the first and the second class passengers, but were still considered more important than the ship's crew and therefore dined apart. Their employers paid £15 10 pence for their single passage in a four-berth room. Travelling in three berths, the cost rose to £20, and in a two berths, £25, about £1,200 in today's money, and equivalent to the average second class fare, but three times that of the third class fare. So here's the distinct types of silver plate napkin rings designed from left to right. Class pattern used in restaurant and cafe Parisan designed by Goldsmiths. So it varies. So the first class napkin ring you can see is very, very beautiful. It's designed very, very carefully, very beautiful patterns. This is the napkin, the star white liner. This is the name of the ship company. In Titanic's second class, the same design of Olympic's silver plate and the fine bone china was used, but unlike first class, the range of tableware was significantly reduced. In the first, grape scissors were provided. In second class, passengers had to pull grapes apart from the bunch. Apart from the indignity of having to handle grapes in such a manner, much of the service was put on at par with the first class dining saloon. So it was very much like dining saloons. This is a very funny detail the author adds. He says that they had to pull apart grapes, whereas in the first class you had grape cutting scissors. This is some of the utensils from these are pots and pans recovered from the Titanic. Here's the menu for the first class breakfast. You see, the word marmalade was spelled as marmalade by this printer. This has been obviously a typing error. And here it says the printer's error in typesetting the word marmalade has been retained. So they kept it. This is how the breakfast options for the first class looked. There's baked apples, Quaker oats, boiled hominy, puffed rice, Findon haddock, lamb collops, eggs, Vienna and Graham rolls, cornbread, buckwheat cakes, blackcurrant conserve, Narbonne honey. Narbonne honey is a very, very special type of honey. It's produced in the Aude district of southwestern France. It was an expensive product in 1912 and seldom available on board steamers. The honey was very light in color, described as white or ivory, with a strong scent of rosemary. So these very, very exclusive food items you get in the first class. Now let's look at the second class breakfast. You have rolled oats, a conserve and tea. You have fruit, fresh fruit, Yarmouth bloaters, grilled ox and kidney beans, American dry hash, ugatin, number 3, grilled sausages, mashed potatoes, grilled ham, and fried eggs. Quite a wonderful spread. Here the spelling of marmalade is correct. This is the first class luncheon. Luncheon is basically what you have for lunch. So St. Ivel was a kind of mild flavored cheddar cheese introduced in. So this is basically cheese. You can have a look at it here. It's a printed menu. Very, very interesting. So thank you so much for joining me on this journey on the Titanic. I will see you in the next class for the guided